The game begins with the most popular opening move, pawn to e4, met by pawn to e5. White develops the knight to f3, attacking the e5 pawn, and black responds with knight to c6. Defending it, white then plays pawn to c3, preparing for central expansion. Black develops their bishop to c5, aiming for the Italian setup. However, this move is not good, because it allows white to immediately play pawn to d4, a strong central push. While pawn to d4 is a good move, I recommend an even stronger option, capturing the bishop on c5 with the knight. By playing knight takes e5, white temporarily sacrifices the knight. On the next move, white plays pawn to d4 and regains the material. If black captures the d4 pawn, white recaptures with the pawn. Attacking black's knight, this creates a strong central pawn structure and puts black's knights under pressure. White also gains a dominant position with active bishops, and a clear plan to push the pawns forward, keeping black on the defensive. It's a very advantageous position. If black instead plays bishop to d6, which is typically the correct response to this kind of tactical sacrifice on e5, it doesn't work here. White can simply capture on e5 and follow up with pawn to f4. The pawn on c3 proves valuable by restricting black's bishop. White can then consider pushing pawns forward. If black retreats the bishop, white can continue advancing, gaining tempo and increasing pressure on black's position. However, it's better for white to first play bishop to e3. Why? If white plays pawn to e5 immediately, black can respond with bishop to c5, placing the bishop on an ideal diagonal. By playing bishop to e3 first, white gains control of key squares, preventing black's bishop from becoming active. On the following move, white can play pawn to e5, creating a highly uncomfortable position for black. At this point, it becomes very challenging for black to develop their pieces. For example, knight to e7 feels awkward, as it completely blocks in black's bishop, leaving black in a difficult position to handle. If black responds with knight to f6, a common move, white can immediately play pawn to e5, which creates a double attack and effectively wins the game. Many opponents, unfamiliar with opening theory, opt for simple moves instead of diving into the complexities. Seeing that bishop to c5 is problematic due to pawn to d4, black might instead play pawn to d6, aiming to solidify the center. In this case, white can confidently play pawn to d4, establishing a strong central presence. The most common response from black in this position is to exchange pawns in the center and then develop their bishop to g4, pinning white's knight to the queen. While this might appear threatening, it's not dangerous at all. White can simply ignore the pin and continue development. If black decides to capture the knight on f3, hoping to weaken white's pawn structure, it's not a significant achievement. White recaptures with the g-pawn, doubling the pawns on the kingside but solidifying the center even further. This structural change also activates white's bishops, which now control vast portions of the board, putting white in a commanding position. In this position, white benefits from a semi-open file for the rook and a strong central pawn structure that controls numerous key squares on the board. These positional advantages provide white with complete domination, a useful technique which counters a pin. For example, if black tries to pin white's knight to the queen with bishop to g4, white can shift the attack to the queenside, where black's defenses are weak. By playing queen to a4, white simultaneously attacks the knight on c6 and prepares to play pawn to d5, aiming to win material. Black is in significant trouble, as defending against these threats is quite challenging. White also has the option to play bishop to b5, adding pressure to the pinned knight on c6. If black attempts to defend with queen to d7, white can play bishop to b5 followed by pawn to d5, increasing the attack. Alternatively, an unexpected move like pawn to h4 can be highly effective. This move prepares bishop to h3, targeting the queen and setting up pawn to d5 to win the knight on c6. If black plays something like bishop to e7, white's sequence of bishop to h3, pawn to d5, and then capturing on c6 wins the game, as the knight is pinned to the king. If black castles queenside to escape the pin, they inadvertently walk into another pin with bishop to h3, this time losing the queen. Against stronger opponents, black might respond with pawn to d5, a move often favored by grandmasters. This aggressive play exploits the fact that white's knight isn't on c3 due to the pawn's position. In this case, white should avoid recapturing immediately, as that would allow black to develop their queen. Instead, white should bring their queen to a4, pinning the knight on c6 and preparing a counterattack with knight takes e5. In many cases, black will misplay by capturing the pawn on c4. After this, white can play knight takes c5, gaining a strong position and maintaining a powerful initiative. In this position, white creates multiple threats. Knight takes c6 and queen takes c4. In most games, black responds with bishop to d7, attempting to defend both threats. However, white then captures the bishop, follows up with queen takes e4, delivering a check to the king, and emerges with an extra pawn, a strong center, and the advantage of two bishops. If black plays bishop to e7, white can respond with pawn to d4, develop the light-squared bishop to d3, and castle. Engines like Stockfish already evaluate this as a winning position for white, thanks to the strong center, active bishops, and other positional advantages. In the past, some believed that black could hold this position by playing queen to d5, a move even used by grandmasters. It defends the pawn on c6, the knight on c6, and counterattacks white's knight on e5. However, white has a powerful way to continue the attack. White plays knight takes c6, and if black recaptures with the queen, white can play bishop to b5, skewering the queen and king, winning the game. Since this isn't an option, black is forced to recapture with the b-pawn, leaving doubled and weak pawns. White then develops with bishop to c4, attacking the queen. The queen retreats to guard the c6 pawn, and white calmly plays pawn to d3, pretending to aim for a trade. If black takes the pawn, white castles, revealing the true plan. The temporary pawn sacrifice opens the d-file, allowing white to place the rook on d1, threatening to capture the pawn on d5 and attack black's queen. This sequence leaves white in a dominant position with multiple active threats, superior piece coordination, and control of the board. In this position, black is constantly forced to defend the pawn on c6, which creates significant problems. For example, if black plays knight to f6, white can respond with the brilliant bishop to f4, attacking the queen and offering a bishop sacrifice. If black moves the queen away, white simply plays queen to c6, creating a double attack and gaining a decisive advantage. These positions are filled with traps for black at every turn, making it difficult even for a prepared opponent. After bishop to f4, if the queen retreats, white can follow up with bishop to d3, offering the other bishop with the same idea. If the queen moves away, queen takes c6 wins material. If black tries to defend with bishop to e7, white can continue the attack with bishop to f5, creating yet another sacrifice opportunity. If black moves the queen to d5, white can push pawn to c4, driving the queen away. Eventually, black will be forced to capture on f4, but then white plays queen to c6. If black attempts to cover the attack with any piece, be it a bishop, knight, or queen, white simply captures on a8, also attacking additional targets. For example, if black castles, white can consolidate with a simple move like queen to f3, defending the bishop. At this point, white is up material, having won the exchange and a pawn, leading to a technically winning position. One of black's best defenses in this position is to play bishop to d7, aiming to neutralize the pin. This involves sacrificing the pawn on d5. While this might feel uncomfortable at first because it attacks black's knight, the key saving move for black is knight to d4, creating a discovered attack and counterplay. In this position, black may attempt to capture your knight and weaken your pawn structure. To counter this, you retreat your queen to d1. This forces black to trade, and as a result, you win a pawn. However, black gains a slight lead in development, leaving the position approximately balanced and equal. After black develops with knight to f6, one of the computer-recommended moves is pawn to c4, a move that I find quite effective. This serves two purposes. It solidifies the pawn on d5, ensuring black cannot recapture it, and it frees the c3 square for your knight. If black plays a developing move, white can respond with knight to c3. If black castles, white plays pawn to d3, creating a strong pawn structure. Despite black's slight lead in development, they find it difficult to generate active play. The position is well barricaded, and white controls key squares effectively. From here, white can continue with bishop to e2 and castle, further improving the position. Black will need to justify their compensation for being down a pawn, as white's setup is solid and leaves little room for counterplay. Even in this scenario, which could be considered the worst-case outcome for white, the position remains balanced and fully playable. Having such a solid fallback option is a great advantage. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned by subscribe.